Good afternoon. So my name is Gino Bawn. I'm a senior engineer at ITPEnergised. I was the project manager to the technical advisory support to the Henry Review, which we carried out last year. So that's the basis of this presentation, looking forward past the Pathfinder to what a programme of lagoons in the UK would look like. Just a bit of background. ITPEnergised was formed last year when the renewable energy consultancy IT Power and the environmental consultancy Energized Environments merged. So this is our group. We've got 35 years of history, mainly in renewable energy, but we're moving forward into transport and infrastructure and urban regeneration at the moment. We've got offices in 4 continents and have worked in over 120 countries around the world. As I said, mainly in renewable energy. I work in the marine team, so we work in all forms of offshore renewable energy. Historically, that was mainly tidal stream, but we're moving into lagoons, barrages, floating PV, that sort of thing. And we work closely with in-stream energy, who have a berth at the Morlais site in Wales. And these are the services we offer. So just quickly, we offer technical services, engineering design, market strategy services, so bringing foreign developers to the UK, to Wales. We also have project services doing things like EIA support, feed studies, that type of work. So moving on to lagoons. Last year, ITPEnergised were appointed the technical advisors to the Henry Review. We subcontracted Zero Energy to help us out with the grid, and Professor Roger Falconer with his modelling expertise in the Severn Estuary, and also Professor Chris Spinney. So we made quite a small consortium to help out the Henry team. And we were concerned with the technical aspects of the review and what the review was trying to answer. So the main question that we were looking at was, what is the sort of value from the tidal lagoon programme? So having a series of lagoons up and down the country, what would that look like? We also looked at issues with system operability of the grid. We looked at cumulative impacts in the Severn. And then we tried to answer this question that John was talking about: what does an optimal lagoon program look like? And we went on to look at decommissioning options and global opportunities as the final thing. So the value of having a program of tidal lagoons up and down the country, that's a tricky question to answer. So we looked at the energy trilemma as a way to try and answer that. So so we looked at sustainability. That was quite simply, how does a program of lagoons help you reach your 2020, 2050 emissions targets? We looked at security of supply. So 20 gigawatts of our aging power stations are going to go offline in the next 3 years. How do we replace that capacity? And how do tidal lagoons help you do that with the nature of their power generation, their predictability, but also their dispatchability? And finally, probably the trickiest question is the costs of tidal lagoons, and how do you evaluate how economically viable they are. Obviously, DEC's traditional method of using a 10% discount rate when looking at renewable energy projects is not particularly applicable to a lagoon that might have a lifetime of over 120 years. So we looked at various cost mechanisms to try and analyse how much value for money lagoons gave you. So that was our strategy for answering the questions. So the first thing we had to do is work out what a program of lagoons looked like. So we identified 18 sites around the country. So mostly these were sites that developers like TLP are interested in, but also we looked at places with good resource. And we collected bathymetry data, resource data on all those sites, and either took TLP designs or carried out a conceptual design of our own at each of these sites, and then modelled the energy output from a lagoon using the parameters from Andritz bulb turbines, and also looked at the costs of each lagoon. So we had 18 lagoons modeled individually. This is an example of our modeling. I think there's 7 or 8 lagoons there, and you can see the nature of the power generation, and that pretty much the lagoons are either in phase with each other or 180 degrees out of phase, meaning that they're generating power at the same time. You can nearly get, from this particular series of lagoons, you can nearly get 24-hour baseline power during springs, but during neaps, then you get gaps in that power generation. That's sort of a spring. And then we came to sort of answering this question that was asked of us: what is an optimal program? So that's needs to be defined a bit further. So we developed a portfolio of different scenarios. We looked at a particular installed capacity. Do you want to replace that 20 gigawatts that's going offline? We looked at the best phasing of lagoons. We looked at lagoons with the lowest environmental impact, and we looked at the lagoons with the best value for money. We also compared that to TLP's first six lagoons. So with the economics, many things affect how viable your lagoon is, particularly the resource. This plot on the right shows the 18 individual lagoons. On the y-axis, we've got capex per annual energy production. On the x-axis, we've got mean tidal range, so fundamentally your resource. You can see the 3 lagoons with the best resource are also the cheapest in terms of cost per energy. And 2 of those 3 are in Wales, and I think all 3 are TLP proposed sites. Other factors that affect your cost per energy are your size of lagoon. The bigger you get, generally, the cheaper your energy is. The coastline and topography, very important. The amount of area that dries out during low tide of your basing, that's quite important. Environmental sensitivity. Existing infrastructure in terms of your grid, and also cost of energy is hugely important. Cost of finance is hugely important. This is directly out of the Henry Review, so basically Charles Henry's conclusion. And what it's saying is that lagoons seem to be a very attractive option in terms of value for money, and they are at least as cost effective as nuclear power and maybe offshore wind. So that's a good thing to take away. Environmental considerations for lagoons. So we looked at the legislation, which is driven by EC directives, so it's subject to change over the next couple of years. We environmentally screened all 18 lagoons and looked at where the risk would be and where you would need compensatory habitat, which is another problem that developers like John and TLP will have. So we looked at the timescales at how to establish a compensatory habitat. What's interesting here is once you can see that your habitat is working, you can start construction legally, but you can't finish construction until you've fully established your habitat. So there's a risky part of your project development there that you have to get around. We also looked at options for decommissioning, taking into account all the evidence that was submitted under the call of evidence for the review. For the grid, we looked at all of TLP's options within the 7 and looked at the reinforcement works on the grid that would be needed and how much that would cost overall. For the system operability of the grid, we looked at the wider UK programme. With our discussions with the National Grid, what's interesting here, although lagoons may cause some problems and some uncertainty on how you operate the grid, the main thing to look at is the capacity they add to the grid, and the National Grid would be able to deal with that. So just the huge amount of capacity they add is the advantage. And then finally, we looked at global opportunities. We didn't spend too much time on this, but in the UK, we estimated at least 37 gigawatts of power. Outside the UK, in Fundy, Gujarat in India, northern France alone, you get 54 gigawatts. That's pretty high-level estimates there. But The opportunities are there. I suppose it's debatable how much of a supply chain you can take across to those places, and a lot of the work will be done locally, but there will be services that the UK will be able to sell. But yeah, the plot shows all areas around the world with good tidal range. I think that's it, just a quick look at our work with the Henry Review. Thank you for this. Yeah.